Why are there so many stories about sex in the Hebrew Bible? And why is the character of Lot having sex with his daughters? Answers to those questions are coming up on Bible Freakout.
No matter what you read or what you hear, there is no need to freak out.
Welcome to Bible Freakout. I'm Dr. Bruce Wells from the University of Texas at Austin. This is the show where we look at how other people might be freaking out about something they've heard about the Bible, and we offer context and other information to help them understand why they don't need to do that. So today I'm still looking at readers' comments to a New York Times article, and the article talked about the Secretary of Education in the state of Oklahoma saying that the public schools in that state should teach the Bible. Now, he may have been saying these things just to get attention, and he certainly got it in several media write-ups that came out, but readers were upset about the constitutionality of the idea, and several readers wrote in and complained about certain aspects of the Bible itself. Last time we looked at some of those comments. Today we're going to look at comments about some of the admittedly crazy and bizarre stories that show up in the Bible, particularly having to do with sex. Some of the readers commented on how some of the stories tell about incestuous sex, and several readers picked out the story of Lot and his daughters in particular. The story comes in Genesis 19, and it occurs right after God has destroyed the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. So the Lord, or Yahweh, actually sends his two angels or messengers to the city. They run into Lot. Lot asks them to stay at his house for the night. The men of the city come around and they pound on the door and they say, "Bring out those two men, those two visitors, so that we can have sex with them." Now, this is meant to show that the city is a quote-unquote wicked city and that it deserves to be destroyed. Lot comes out and says, no, you don't want to do this great evil or wickedness. And then he says something rather shocking. He says, "Here, I have two virgin daughters of mine. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you want to with them. But don't do anything to these two men who've come to visit here at my house and to whom I owe hospitality." The two angels reach out, they grab Lot, pull him back into the house, and then they strike the men outside the house with blindness so that they don't cause Lot any more trouble. But then they tell Lot and his family, "Look, the Lord is going to destroy the city. You need to leave. Make sure you get far away from the city because everything here is going to be destroyed." Well, Lot and his two daughters leave, and they go and they hide in a cave. And this is where Lot's daughters decide that they should have sex with their father, and on subsequent nights, each one does. Now, this sounds pretty horrific. What we have to understand is that there's certain imagery or symbolism going on in the episode with Lot and his daughters in the cave that's not necessarily clear to modern readers. So as far as Lot and his two daughters are concerned, the entire world has been destroyed. From their point of view, from everything they can see, it looks as if the entire human race has been wiped out. They are the only ones who've survived. And in fact, the older daughter tells her younger daughter that this is indeed the case, and that it's their job now to get their father drunk, have sex with him, so that they can keep the human race going. So on the first night, the oldest daughter does this, and on the second night, the younger daughter does this. Now, the story is meant to tell you that civilization, again from their perspective, has come to an end. They're not living in a house, they're living in a cave. Things have gone backward. They are living in a cave that has no door on it. They're exposed to the elements to some extent, and they're exposed to danger, which is the opposite of human civilization. Third, they are in a situation where they have to violate a severe taboo, the taboo against father-daughter incest, to keep humanity going. And then, what's interesting about what the daughter says is she says that the daughters themselves need to lie down with their father. And in the Hebrew Bible, it almost never says that a woman lies with a man. In fact, it's almost always the opposite, where a man does the lying with a woman. But in this story about Lot and his daughters, things are so backwards that now the women have to take the initiative when it comes to sex. Certainly it's a horrific story, but the story is not trying to condone what's happening between Lot's daughters and their father. In fact, it's trying to describe just how backwards everything has become, just how much the world has been thrown into chaos. This is how bad things have become for humanity here at the end of the story. Now again, this is from the perspective of Lot and his daughters, and the story is trying to show you how far Lot has come from when he thought he had it made by living in a very economically prosperous city like Sodom, and things could not be any worse. Now the story ends with a little bit of humor, it seems, and I'm not sure if this part of the story was added later or if it was an original part of the story, but the story indicates that both daughters get pregnant, and the older daughter gives birth to the ancestor of the Moabites, a people group that lived near the Israelites, and the younger daughter gives birth to the ancestor of the Ammonites, who also lived near the Israelites. Now these were competing nation-states, competing groups, and it seems as if the author of this story, or the author of this last part, is poking fun at the rival groups of the Moabites and the Ammonites and trying to show that their ultimate ancestor came from this horrible situation where there was an incestuous relationship, and isn't that awful, and shouldn't you be ashamed to be a part of that group? So should the story be taught to children? Well, you could certainly teach it to high school students and maybe even middle school students, as long as you explain it within its context and talk about the imagery and symbolism that the story represents. There are a number of things in literature and entertainment that we tend to keep from younger children, and we have to remember that the Bible generally was written for grown-ups living in the ancient Middle East, who understood how stories worked back then, who understood a lot of the background to the culture and traditions that they followed. And so we can think about it in terms of how a reader from the ancient Middle East would have understood the story and how the episode with Lot and his daughters would have functioned. We'll have one more episode where we look at comments to the same New York Times article. Until then, remember, no matter what you hear or what you read,
There is
no need to
freak out.